We're good? Good afternoon. Everybody awake this afternoon after that great lunch? We'll get started. I like to talk and move, so I'm going to stay down here. Is everybody here okay? Hear me all right? All right. My name is Dan Velez. I'm from Raytheon. And some of you may, right off the top, what the heck is Raytheon doing here? You don't see Raytheon at too many of these shows, but we have a new Raytheon. We're a big, defense contractor, known pretty well around the Beltway, but not so much, in the Midwest, right? And but over the last few years, Raytheon's been acquiring some different cyber products. I was one of those acquisitions. We started out as a little company in Salt Lake City doing insider threat, and some others have been picked up as well. So we're now Raytheon Cyber Products, and but that's not, what I'm here to tell you about really is a little bit about our experiences in building insider threat programs. So my responsibility is operationalizing our tools. I started out as a customer in the federal space years ago, and in our agency had to build a new insider threat program. And so I've kind of taken that and have repeated that in customer spaces and so on. So what I hope you'll get out of this are some of my lessons learned. This presentation kind of comes from like my program kickoff, right, or kickoff meeting for a project on if we do these things, this is going to go well. So hopefully you'll find this helpful in who's building an insider threat program or who has an insider threat program at their company today. Do you know? Okay. Thinking about it? Right? I mean, Mr. Snowden sure has made business pretty wonderful these days, and lots of people are thinking about watching what privileged users are doing on the endpoints, and so on. But Snowden is that's the 1,000-year flood. My background, I'm retired Navy, and so I bring a lot of submarine stories and sea stories into the presentation and some of my background. And this was an insider threat problem that the Navy experienced, and albeit a few years ago, but this is probably more in line with what's happening in industry today. What happened with this insider threat is that nobody wanted to steal information, but this small contractor out of Boylston, Massachusetts, had a contract with the Navy, and in particular a cell in Naples, Italy. And that's kind of the home away from home for submarines that are overseas, and water space is managed there, and our work with NATO countries and so on, we kind of tell, hey, we're going to be in this box and you're going to be in that box, and keep things from going bump in the night, which are bad in submarines. And this small contractor managed the computer system that was used to deconflict those things, and they lost the contract. Small guy. And so he left a cron job to wipe out the database and a bunch of other data, 3 days after his return to the United States, and it worked. Fortunately, the owners of the system had a good backup system and so on and so forth, and were able to recover without any loss of life or injury or that kind of thing. But that's, a simple little on the way out the door, I'll get these guys kind of thing is probably more like what the rest of us will experience, right, than the Snowden. So the auditing and monitoring piece, is important in detecting these kinds of activities. And this presentation started out with, what's wrong with the status quo, and the status quo being my assumption that, user activity monitoring in general across networks, across government enterprise, commercial enterprises, is totally inadequate, particularly to detect something like that, right? A simple script, a cron job inserted on a Friday afternoon to cause some damage. So when we talk about the insider threat, and I don't spend a lot of time on this, if you're here you believe that something needs to be done, but talk about very quickly the definition or the threat that the insider threat when you look at those definitions, they basically have two elements in common. And first of all, it's somebody or something that has authorized access to the network. And then the second element is that using that access to cause you harm, whether it's the theft, it's the sabotage, violence, right, etc. And sometimes the machine or the machines in your network are, the victims, that's what's being attacked, or they're the witness to the activity on the network, right? Workplace violence, the email system saw that communication, so to speak, right? So why aren't we auditing? So in this past year, as we've kind of gone to the commercial space, it's interesting to hear why more companies, don't perform auditing and monitoring. I mean, is anybody here? Does your company, raise your hand if you think your company's monitoring your activity? Or you think they're monitoring your activity? Okay, so that's good. So there's probably some training and awareness component to your company's activities, and you'll see that's one of the requirements or recommendations. Recently I've been spending a lot of time in New York, in the financial area, and I find that number one and number two is what I'm hearing most often, right? First of all, culture. So one hedge fund said to us, we pay our employees an ungodly amount of money. Everybody loves working here. Why would anybody, want to hurt us? People don't quit this job. We might walk them out the door, but that doesn't give them any time to do anything. They love us. And we sure don't want our employees to know or even think that we're looking at their email. So there's a culture, right? The second is resources. That same hedge fund. There's a staff. This room right here is almost as big as the entire staff that manages some sick number, $5 billion in assets or something. And, this guy is the security guy. That's it. And so, the problem or the challenge is more of a lack of resources, right? He doesn't have time to look at endless rows of events every day of people who might be doing something wrong. And so the whole idea that we just don't have enough resources to look at audit logs is just another thing we're going to collect that nobody's going to look at. And so that's another challenge to, why aren't they auditing? This one here, it's new to us, right? It looks hard. Oh, and then the best one is the last one, right? All right, because that's when we get called. We haven't been hit yet, but all too often our programs or our activities start because it happened, all right? That event happened. All right, so that's why we aren't auditing. Oh, that's what we're seeing anyway. And so everybody knows it, that we should be doing something about it. I mean, even government knew before Snowden that they needed to be auditing and monitoring user activity, including privileged users. It's common sense, and it's even in the Common Sense Guide to Mitigating Insider Threats. These are great references. And if you look through these references, you find some 800-something references to auditing, whether it's auditing account creation, or auditing account deletion, auditing and monitoring, baseline changes, the addition of programs, changes of hardware configuration, and so on. And in fact, these guides suggest that inadequate monitoring or auditing really is an issue you should be concerned about. And in fact, that's where some of our New York friends have been calling us in on is to meet compliance requirements for certain auditing and monitoring, to meet that, at least that minimum, and be beyond inadequate auditing. So it's common sense. So our approach to this whole problem set is one that, again, kind of came from my Navy days, and that was, how does a submarine go to sea with 130 young kids 20-year-olds and operate autonomously, operating a nuclear power plant and all kinds of sophisticated electronic equipment and weapon systems, and not have anything go wrong for 6 months. How does that happen? Well, that happens by the officers and the chiefs being in the spaces and being out on the floor noticed and looking and watching. And when a sailor is got their hands on a piece of equipment, it's, what are you doing? And where's the procedure? And is that the right multimeter? Is that the right torque wrench? You have to be out there, you have to be looking. And so the same problem exists on the networks. If you think your users are just following, you've posted rules and you've given them an acceptable use policy, and they've signed it and got their username and password, that's not enough, right? You've got to be out there. You have to look. It's so often, the greatest thing about selling our tools is all they do is fight to get that proof of concept done. Because as soon as we get it installed, it's really the first time anybody's really looking. Always find something. Always, always, always. And the CIO goes, holy crap, we need this on every desktop. So, and in fact, we've had customers call us 24 hours after doing the install, coming in and say, oops, turn it off. We had no idea. We didn't plan for this. We're not ready to react or respond to that. All right? And so inspecting and looking and being aware of what's going on is really just a good management practice, right? And so that extends to the insider threat and management of the insider threat on your networks. All right, so this is the audience participation time. This is why I get down off the stage so I don't break a leg. And I like to talk and I like to get a little bit of feedback because I always learn something, as well as I hope I'm helping you learn a little something today. But so what makes a complete insider threat program? Right? We sell a tool, right? But a tool is not a program, right? So give me an idea of, we mentioned it earlier. So somebody said, or a couple of you raised your hand, said that you're already aware. How were you aware that your company audits or monitors your activity? Do they tell you? Did you take training? Okay, so there's a training and education component. Policy, that's right, written policies. Policies from an acceptable use policy on through to maybe even policies on how employees enter and exit the workforce, right? When the employee is dismissed, there are not just policies but processes, right, that are followed to bring an employee on or discharge an employee. What else? What else would make up a good insider threat program? Okay, response procedures. That's a good one. What are we going to do when we find one? Yep. What else? Okay, technical controls. That's a great one. Right? There's a lot of vendors in the room over here selling technical controls, things that are supposed to stop and block and keep a user here or there. Right? Okay. What else? All right. Well, we'll let it build. So we talked about, so we mentioned policies. And policies are, as I said, not only things like an acceptable use policy, but maybe you have a policy for moving data on and off the network. And you have a policy that only this group of users are authorized to use removable media or move data in or out of our enterprise, right? The processes. So when a user is, or when an employee is discharged from the company, first this happens. We go to the desk and secure their badge and secure their personal effects, and then walk them out the door, and then it goes to security, and we turn off the badge, and then go down to the help desk, IT, and the account is disabled, and it goes into some maintenance, some kind of maintenance mode to recover the data or store the data, and so on. So there are processes. What's HR's role? I saw a good article this week. What's HR's role in the insider threat? In the insider threat problem. What's their role? Background checks, sure, before coming in. What else? Sorry? Sure, termination procedures. How about in between? Sure, investigations, right? Tricky, slippery slope, especially with, unions and collective bargaining agreements and things like that. Yes, ma'am? Sure. Okay. So making sure that employees know the policies and those policies are enforced. But there's also the opportunity to mitigate the problem too, right? So bring the right resource. Wow. Maybe our employee has a substance abuse problem. Let's fix him. Right? Before his performance degrades to the point where we have to fire him and he steals data and walks out the door. Right? Technical controls. It's a great one, right? Because you're buying a lot of tools. Some tools are used to effect insider threat requirements. Training and awareness, we talked about, that's the no-brainer. But it's one of those continuous and ongoing thing. In fact, I don't know if you saw when I logged on. I mean, do you have a banner on your desktop that you have to click through that says, "We're watching you"? Yeah, good best practice. Risk management. There's one that's missing a lot when we start a program with a customer, because sometimes they're sitting across the desk and everybody's all excited and we've had our coffee and our donuts and the conversation turns to, what do we look for? Like we have the answer, right? Insider threat management is risk management, right? It's understanding what can an insider do, what's our most important information, what makes us special, different, etc. And let's do something about that. And then finally, right, there's the auditing and monitoring. All right, so we do that. But without these things, this is pretty useless. Because when we write policies and we're doing the auditing and monitoring, we are auditing and monitoring against your written policies. What should employees be doing? What are they really doing? We're auditing and monitoring against those processes. The technical controls. Okay, great. You got this DLP solution. It's supposed to turn off the USB devices or prevent this material from going to a USB. Is it working? Has it been misconfigured? The last update fail, and 1/3 of the workstations aren't really enforcing that policy anymore. Training and awareness. Just counting events sometimes is what we're doing. Are employees hitting all those phishing attacks? Are they clicking? All right, so we can measure, write policies against that activity. And of course, the risk management. So you've identified certain critical pieces of information in your company. Those are the things we have to make sure stay safe, don't go anywhere. I pushed a button, it went red. There we go. And it's often where those first policies come from. All right, so those prevention, the whole idea here is that, the prevention is a bigger piece of the pie than that detection. It will always be the case. You can't detect everything, all right? But the role of the tool here is to support those other activities. And if you can swallow that pill, it makes developing your project plan and understanding the who, what, when, and where that much easier. So, if you had an insider threat program in your company, did it start like this? Right? This is what we see. This is what I see. And something bad happens. You put out the fire. The employees walked out the door. Don't really know how much data was taken. Well, this can never happen again. And this is frequently the kind of conversation that happens in our customer spaces. But we show up and there's, like I said, there's nothing else in the pie. I've got a tool, got a great tool, but we have nowhere to start. So I hope that the rest of this will provide the foundation other than a bad day, for your program. And that's really the thrust of this conversation, right? Because it's not just a technology problem. This is a people problem. right? The technology has to support that people problem. All right, so we'll give it a solid foundation. So we're going to talk about my buddy, one of my old bosses, Mike Tice, is out there at Carnegie Mellon, and he always used to say, you know, hope is not a strategy. We need a real strategy. So here's what I propose is a good strategy. It's the type of things that if our customers have a handle on these things, the project goes well. It's very easy to implement the tool. It's easy for the customer to understand how to use the tool. So the first one is the most obvious, but you'd be surprised. So I was in a DoD organization going to deploy the tool. We're off in some place far from the parent command, and we walk in to deploy within that segment of the network, and the network's chief says, "Get out." All right, not on this network. This is my network right here. And with a lack of authority and top-down direction, you know, you run into those kinds of problems. So it's really important from day one that, you know, the chief executive, the one who owns this problem, put someone in charge and make it very clear that this is a priority. Another Rickover-ism, you know, if you can't point to the person responsible when something goes wrong, you never really had anybody in charge. And some of our projects kind of flounder there because the person assigned to roll out the tool, you know, doesn't really have buy-in across the organization or the authority to break down the doors and get things done. And that's when things go bad. So I've often seen this, you know, written in a policy. It states that this is our vision, this is our requirement, here's our plan, this is what we're going to do, this is the one in charge, this is their authority, etc. All right, so we call it the belly button. Right? Every project needs a strong belly button. Then this is the why. Document the why. Too often at that kickoff meeting, there's a bunch of people sitting around the conference room that found out about this meeting the day before. And they're not really sure. They know it's a security tool, not really sure what the business case is and so on and so forth. But yeah, you got to go to that meeting. It's that thing. So clearly documenting the why. Are we doing this for PCI requirements in the government, an executive order that says we have to have an insider threat program? Some other requirement, some compliance need, or our risk management plan should be well defined so that your project team understands that and all the subsequent decisions are made with that objective in mind. So the staff, always a tricky one. If you're already, I would tell you that if I come into your space and you have a forensics team and your forensics team understands, you know, how to handle data and the sensitivities around being exposed to the most sensitive data in your company's networks or employees' data. You have that type of skill set already, that team is likely to be able to implement a tool like this with little issue. But if you're not doing that, and many of our customers are not, you have to build it. So the skill set, you see them there. There's a good book. I wish I'd put it on here, but it's on digital investigations. But the author describes how, you know, this mission area is the intersection of those areas, right? There's some civil issues, civil rights issues, privacy issues, and so on, kind of intersect with employment issues, right? We talked about, I mentioned earlier, maybe there's there's a union and a collective bargaining agreement, and there are things that may be in play here. And of course, there's always the chance that you're going to find something that you're going to have to call law enforcement for. So that team needs to just have an understanding of those issues. Here's a good one. Right? Who should be operating this tool? So we suggest that when you embark on this kind of a plan, you screen those employees you're going to use for this capability. Should be subject to another level of scrutiny. Right? Watching the watchers is part of watching the watchers. I'm going to put a pretty powerful tool or tools in their hands. So an understanding of some of those fundamentals, some insider threat training. Do you know where to go get insider threat training? Anyone? Carnegie Mellon has a new course. Good course. Give you an overview, soup to nuts, of an insider threat program. They have a weekend version, and they have an insider threat program manager version. Good place to go. Even their website. I mentioned that later. Questions here? You have a question for me here? Building the staff? Okay. So stakeholders. This isn't something that IT can do by themselves. Right? When we're rolling out the policies to audit Gmail activity, isn't the time, isn't the first time the lawyers, your general counsel, should be aware of this program, right? I usually ask the question, who should be involved? Why would we have, well, some of them are pretty self-explanatory now, right? The union, computer network defense. There's a big overlap between defense of the network and detection of insider threats, right? Because who here has investigated, an intrusion in their network? Nobody? Okay, a couple, right? So there's always the question, who, right? Is it really Bob who's scouring up documents, or is it somebody commanding and controlling Bob's machine? Right. So there's an overlap here, understanding when things are going bad, what's the root of the problem. All right. So engaging the stakeholders early and having these folks involved in a project from the get-go always makes things go a lot smoother. We don't have as many stops and breaks and side paths to have to take. To go back and get the permission from somebody or get their buy-in along the way, if we get them involved from the get-go. So I've already mentioned one of my secrets, to the insider education. Go to Carnegie Mellon. Carnegie Mellon's got a great website, lots of free information there, some classes you could take. But the fact of the matter is here, while the sales exec that I work with, wants you to, well, that's unfair, but a lot of the sales folks want you to know that, or think that, hey, this is it, this is the tool. You have this tool, it works, you push the button, we find the bad guy. And so, this work, insider threat detection, really is a blend of art and science. The science is there. The science is emerging. We've integrated with some folks that do some interesting things with data. So, for example, there's one that the analytics tool kind of can see a rising star in a company. And so they can see a rising star just from email metadata, who this person talks to, where they are in the hierarchy of the organization, how often and how much they communicate with their peers, with their subordinates, how often superiors are reaching down, getting information, and you can see in graphical representation, you know, this rising star. So consequently, they can see the falling star. And so what happens to the falling star? You know, the falling star is spending a lot more time on LinkedIn and communicating with outsiders, starting effectiveness around the company starting to fade and go away. And so how do we use that information? Well, those are people who leave the company. And what do people who leave the company do? Steal data. That's right. They take data. So as part of a risk management plan in this one agency, that's what we do. Anybody who's departing, we don't wait for the 2-week notice. You wait for the 2-week notice, it's already done. The data's already gone. So we're trying to find employees that are disaffected and probably leaving and crank up the auditing right there. So there is some science there, and it's emerging, but a lot of it is art. It's the stuff that you know about because you know your networks. You know what happened last year. You know what weaknesses exist. So when I say art, I mean it's just experience, right? The war stories, things that have been happening. So when you take one of these workshops, you learn things like this. They break down insider threats into different kinds of models. And you don't have to become a psychologist to get through these classes, but you understand the model because the model is very helpful in development of the program and audit and monitoring rules. But this is the malicious insider model. So they break this down. They say, hey, the user has, the person has some predisposition to this kind of activity, right? Not everybody, when they experience a bad thing at work, is going to go and try to take down a database, right? Some people will and some people won't, and there's certain characteristics about those people who will. That's the assumption. All right? So I say with Private Manning, right? Familiar with Private Manning in the Army and WikiLeaks? Right? So Private Manning was a good soldier on day one, right? And then something happened. Private Manning decided that Private Manning didn't like the Army any longer and was mad. So unmet expectations. Unmet expectations could be passed over for promotion. It can be removed from a project. Whatever that is. Then there's the precursor. This is their model now, right? Carnegie Mellon's model for the malicious insider. Precursor activity. This is the hunting. This is the failed logins. This is the what's over there and what's in here. And I'm snooping around here, I'm snooping around there. Precursor activity. And then in the model comes the act. That's the day the USB shows up at work. All right, here we go. And the resulting theft or damage. And so that model is helpful because each of those steps may have technical observables for this auditing and monitoring solution. So as a very simple and basic, you know, resume.doc, LinkedIn updates. Now does that alone mean that, you know, we have an insider threat? No. But it's in the model, it's in the chain, right? So if we say, hey, we're going to watch for resume.doc, and you have to convince, you know, your managers on why you're doing it. You know, having models like this helps to explain or give you a methodology for your detection scheme. Precursors, that's the failed logons, right? Access denied, access denied. There's the USB event, right? And there's the download. So these are all technical observables. So when you go and take a little bit of education, get a little bit of education, go to Carnegie Mellon or some other place, not really sure who else offers that kind of training, but you speak the language a little bit. You know, you learn to speak the language of the state of the art and understand the state of the art, and it helps when you're formulating your plan. You can't just audit everything about everybody all the time. You have to be able, you know, prioritize these things and then be able to provide a rationale for some of your decisions. So that's understanding how the technology is an enabler, right? I put DLP right here. That's where DLP is, right? Stop and block. Maybe not a lot of visibility here. Questions for me here? Boy, you guys are easy. Did they not like have brownies today? Okay. Yes.
Back on the staff slide.
Yeah.
How long does it typically take to get someone hired into that part of the process?
Yeah. So, like even on our staff, you know, we generally start with cyber type and teach the other skills. So, bring in an access data or an end case proficient kind of person, and that usually means that's usually on the order of a couple of months of training of those other sensitivities, right? So in other words, this is all about technical observables, and so it's understanding artifacts, it's understanding what does a log file mean. So this log file was touched or was written to, right? Or this registry key is written to or read from. You know, what does that mean? And so it's a lot of that, right? And so the timeline, if you start out with a forensics background, it's a few months when you're going to be very proficient in these kinds of things. Does that help? Yes, ma'am. No, DLP is used for intellectual property protection. Yeah, absolutely. But you know, the D is about the data, right? I mean, it's about that nugget and doesn't expose as much. A user activity monitoring tool is trying to expose more user activity and behaviors. You have to see it, maybe to contrast the two. Yes, sir.
The way you laid that out reminds me of the kill chain.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. In that, you know, there is a kill chain to the insider threat problem, right? I mean, the whole idea, hopefully, is with a good insider threat program, will we pick up a user somewhere in here, right? Maybe so for the predispositions, maybe we screened them out of pre-employment, but now they're here, and maybe there's a substance abuse problem, right? That's leading to poor performance and so on and so forth. And if we can intercept them right here and get them into a program, maybe we won't experience these other things, right? Yeah, absolutely. Kill chain's a good description. All right, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. We got about 10 minutes left, and I want to leave some time for your questions. So we call this, you know, typically it's the Washington Post test, and that is there needs to be a good governance and oversight plan, right? Watching the watchers, and the tool needs to support that as well. All right, so there needs to be lots of auditing in your tools so that you can detect bad behavior even within the tool. All right? I had a customer who had an analyst that walked the analyst out the door. And they walked the analyst out the door because one analyst had a particular affinity for reviewing emails of a certain female in the CIO's office. And so it was only through auditing and the use of that capability that was detected. Right? So that's important. But governance and oversight is more than that. It's permissions and who can grant access to the data and release of the data. Who's going to approve the policies that go out, to the enterprise? Those types of things. All right. So that's what I mean by governance and oversight. Then this is the documentation part. Sometimes called the ConOps, sometimes called the business case, right? The who, what, when, and where, because we're going to need this. If you have this documented ahead of time, big picture, you can answer these kinds of questions. Then the project plan can move ahead, and the project team will have an understanding of the principles for the deployment. So, for example, excuse me, how are we going out overt? Are we going to deploy this capability as I'm watching you.exe? Right? Or are we going to go out looking like some component of a threat scanner on the network and pay no mind, just looking for APTs? Who's going to deploy? Are we going to use our enterprise IT staff, or are we going to handpick a few select individuals, vet them, screen them, give them the capability, and have them work together and report on, but not necessarily expose all the capabilities to the whole IT staff. That's really a best practice because the IT staff are often some of the first and frequent targets of inquiries. All right, so we have to answer those questions and document it. Who owns the data? Oh my gosh. We've spent weeks talking about that sometimes. So the team's going to need clear guidance. You have to document some of these basic questions and assumptions and your principles so that we get it all done. Tool selection. I'm going to cruise right through this. But find a tool that fits. All right, I highlight this. Don't forget the command and control features. And what I mean by that is don't just get hung up on the glossy, slick, and the sexy agent and all the things it can do. But pay close attention to command and control requirements. Things like, can I have two-person controls on there? So for the M&A shop, for example, you may not want one analyst to be able to walk in there. Maybe we want somebody from that team to be present. All right. Does it provide the auditing and monitoring of the users, the analyst activities? Privileged user tough. He said the privileged users are often the subjects of these kinds of inquiries. So you may have requirements there that the tool survive or report. Questions here? All right, we're down to 2 minutes. So we're towards the end here. So defeating obstacles. Now we're to the implementation plan because we've had a tool, we've got the governance and oversight set up, we've got a project leader, we've talked to all the stakeholders and so on and so forth. And here are just some tidbits for some roadblocks I've seen. The first bullet. It's not a hard IT project. You're going to spend more time on non-IT things. All right, be prepared for it. A lab installation that you can do today or tomorrow in your lab gives you a jump start on production network activities. So demand it, right? Ask if you're going to go buy a tool, ask for one. Implementation plans. You know, right? You don't just want a stack of DVDs and an invoice, right? But some guidance on how. What have you learned, right? Ask your vendor. Ask your vendor for implementation plans, templates. Culture. We talked about culture before. Don't forget, this is a big one. You know, at some point you have to decide what you're going to tell the employees and how. You may be 9 months from really being at your initial operating capability. Start now to change that culture. If employees don't think that you're going to be monitoring their email, let's start telling them today. All right. So 9 months from now, it's not a showstopper. Okay. And I use this one all the time. Get ready for the blame. Anytime there's that little whisper project in the back hall. Get ready for the blame that my browser is slow and Drudge Report takes 17 seconds to come up now. It used to take 2, and my Outlook is really, really slow. So, you know, sometimes we, although our tool is instrumented and provides a lot of performance stuff, some aren't. And so sometimes we say we're deploying to the 3rd floor and we're not. And we just demonstrate to the CIO, here come the calls, right? Monday morning. Yeah. Okay. And this is not a set and forget. So be ready to continuously improve those policies, all right? And ask for some help there. So listen, so if you have those, you know, handle on those things, and you do a little bit of homework, and it's not hard to get educated, you're going to be far better off than a lot of our customers that are trying to deploy a tool or technology. So what questions do you have for me before we blow out of here? Nothing? That's easy. All right. Thank you.